My name's Roshan Dadu. I'm the South Africa BDS Coalition coordinator, and our coalition is also part of the Pan-African Palestine Solidarity Network that we are developing. We launched it last year with the in-person meeting in Dakar in Senegal. And one of the issues that came out of that meeting that we feel in Africa we really need to focus on combating is this kind of push of the apartheid Israeli state into Africa around so-called development, but now it's also clearly private sector, startup nation stories selling so-called solutions to water issues, the water crisis in our continent, and agri-tech, but we know that that's a sort of a soft way of winning over people, whilst at the same time there's pushing to sell weapons and now particularly spyware to regimes and governments on our continent. So we're making those connections that repression in our continent, the instability and authoritarian governments in our continent are using equipment and weapons and spyware on the back of also sort of using the disaster capitalism of the water crisis to present so-called developmental solutions, and that these things have already been tested on the lives of Palestinians with, for instance, water theft, as Manal from Palestine is going to speak a bit more to, land grabs. Of course, we know the occupation is at a critical moment now in Palestine, particularly in terms of Mustafa Yatta in the South Hebron Hills in the occupied West Bank, where if they succeed in evicting the people who are resisting in those areas, it will be the biggest land grab since '67. So trying to make those connections and to make the fact that we're fighting a common struggle encourage us to, in the continent, to see Palestine solidarity as part and parcel of our own struggle. And of course, as Nelson Mandela said, we won't have true freedom until the Palestinians are free. So that was really just a sort of overall sort of a context to this conversation. We're very excited because we've been making these connections. The meeting that PAPS in the Pan-African Network held in Dakar, we had it just before the Alternative Water Forum and the Governmental Water Forum also in Dakar. And we've been trying to make these connections and see how we can collectively campaign together, both for our water security and our water commons and against privatization of water in our continent, but in the same moment in solidarity with the Palestinian people and raising up the issue of apartheid Israel and how it is using water there as well. So without further ado, we have lots of amazing speakers. Perhaps if I can just go through everyone who will be contributing now, and then I'll disappear mostly for the rest of the meeting, and just to indicate the order of speakers. So first of all, we have Manal, who we're very happy has joined us. She's from Stop the Wall campaign in Palestine and works very closely with grassroots campaigns there, particularly in this area now of Masfiata. We were hoping they could join us, but they are just in a total state of crisis and really coming under attack on a daily basis in the villages there. So it was difficult to organize for that at the moment. But she'll be speaking particularly about the situation in Palestine and how the water issue affects Palestinians and is used as a way of the apartheid state furthering its tentacles and its attempts at political support through these kind of water projects. After that, we'll hear from, if Sia is here, we were hoping to hear from Sia, who's very much involved in South Africa in grassroots campaigns in the Eastern Cape, the water crisis committees. And then after that, we'll hear from Faiza, who's involved in the Western Cape on water issues, but is also part of the Africa Water Commons Collective. Following Fazer, we hope Leo, if he's here, but if not, don't panic. We have a video input from Leo, who's the coordinator of the Africa Water Justice Network, also is involved in the Ghana Water Citizens Network, and also represents Blue Planet Project. After Leo, if Fatou is here from Senegal, we'll give her a few minutes. She's part of the Pan-African Palestine Network, but was also very involved in water issues and was at the Alternative Water Forum on the panel about Africa and Palestine and water in Dakar earlier in the year. And then we'll hear from Susan, who is here, but who has prepared a really excellent presentation. So we'll be using that video, but she's also here afterwards to answer questions and join the discussion. Dinesh, who is here, but may not be by the time it comes to his slot, I understand, but has also given us excellent video input. And then finally, Mira, who'll maybe give a overall context right at the end. So as you see, it's amazing that we've got so many people and that all of you could actually make it at the same time. We'd asked for video inputs thinking that a lot of people wouldn't be able to. So it's really exciting that you're all here in real life, as it were, not quite in real life, at least real life on Zoom. But obviously time is a bit tight. So we would ask people to try to be brief, if possible. But enough from me, I'll hand over now to Manal.
Thanks a lot, Roshan. I already recorded a video, but like I'm happy to repeat or say more than what I said in the video. So I'd like to start with the JNF, actually, with the Jewish National Fund, which was part of the reason why the End Water Apartheid campaign was created, because as you know, the End Water Apartheid campaign was launched on August 15th, following a meeting that took place between Israeli water experts and South African officials. The meeting that was sponsored by the Jewish National Fund, which took place in August, is an act of blue washing, which means that the JNF, through that act, wanted to deflect attention from its water apartheid practices and also its complicity in entrenching Israeli apartheid and settler colonialism. And I want to get back to the 1950s, just a few years after Israel was created on the ruins of Palestinian villages and towns. The Jewish National Fund decided or started working on draining Al-Hawla Lake and its surrounding swamps, and which is a really important and sensitive area for animal species. So it badly affected animal species. And draining Al-Hawla Lake took place or was made possible after ethnically cleansing more than 10,000 Palestinians who were living there during the coming into being of Israel between 1947 and also 1949. And after draining Al-Hawla Lake, the Sea of Galilee was badly affected and the flow of water to the Sea of Galilee was deteriorated, which also badly affected the flow of water to the Jordan River, because the Sea of Galilee used to move water from Al-Hawla Lake to the Jordan River. Coinciding with that, the JNF, jointly with Mikorot, Israel's national water company, they constructed dams on the Jordan River, and that was also this affected badly the flow of water to the Jordan River, and also the water flowing to the Dead Sea. Now the Dead Sea is about to dry up because there is no water moving from the Jordan River to the Dead Sea, because the Jordan River has almost become like a river of sewage. So that's just an example of how the Jewish National Fund, from the very beginning, from just a few years after the creation of Israel, has started practicing water apartheid in order to prevent Palestinians from benefiting from the water of the Jordan River. And now currently the Jewish National Fund is working on a project that is called Blueprint Negev. And through this project, the JNF is developing water infrastructure in Naqab, and this is to the detriment of Palestinians who live there. Now, there is 36 unrecognized Palestinian villages in Naqab, and people who live there, they are threatened by Israeli ethnic cleansing, where the JNF wants to construct settlements or help in building settlements for Jews only, and also in planting forests in the area, which is an act of environmental colonialism as well. And so currently Israel has been, or Israeli water apartheid practices have accelerated and have intensified Israeli settler colonial objectives, or the realization of these objectives and advancing them, because there are like Area C of the West Bank is totally under the control of the Israeli colonial government, and many Palestinians, tens of thousands of Palestinians, are denied access to their own water resources, especially because Area C of the West Bank is abundant in water resources. So water is being weaponized in order to expel Palestinians from their land. And Masafer Yatta, which Roshan mentioned, is just a case in point here. So for decades, the Israeli occupation authorities have denied Bedouin communities in Masafer Yatta from building their own and developing their own water infrastructure in the area. Of course, this is through the support of Mikro, while at the same time, the settlements that are being built in Masafer Yatta, they have free and unlimited access to water resources. And Masafer Yatta is one of the areas that is one of the most vulnerable areas to the climate crisis. And denying Palestinians access to water resources in that area makes or exacerbates the climate crisis and helps in expelling them from their land. So far, like the lack of access to water has affected the agricultural sector in that area and hurting communities because the flow of rainwater is decreasing because of climate change. And this is added to Israeli water apartheid practices that have been in place for decades. So these herding communities, or the lifestyle, the nomadic lifestyle of these herding communities, is decimating. And also there is certain areas or grazing areas are threatened by desertification due to overgrazing. So this just shows how Israeli practice of water apartheid leads to other effects or consequences related to the environment or environmental destruction. Yeah, so just I want to wrap up by saying that the End Water Apartheid campaign is an important campaign in order to uncover Israeli water apartheid practices and how trying to or claiming to be helping other countries like South Africa to address its water crisis issues or water problems is just an act of blue washing. And it's more than this. It reinforces the development project, which is the other face of colonialism, the development discourse, sorry, which is the other face of colonialism, by showing Israel as this benefactor that wants to support South Africa, which is still an underdeveloped country, in order to face its water or find solutions to its water problem, while in fact the root causes of South Africa's water problem is the legacy of apartheid colonialism and corruption. Yeah, I'm gonna stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Manal. I think that was a really excellent setting for us to continue discussing the Water Apartheid campaign, and thanks for mentioning how it started recently, provoked by this visit through the JNF of these Israeli so-called experts to solve our crisis here. I don't think Sia is here, so maybe we can move on to Faiza, who is here.
Adrian's got the recording.
Okay, we'll use the recording.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Faiza Meyer. I'm from Cape Town in South Africa. I'm a water justice activist. I am a feminist with the African Eco-Feminist Collective. I am a member of the African Water Commons Collective. I'm also a member of the Western Cape Water Caucus, which is a part of the South African Water Caucus, and we are all part of the campaign to end water apartheid. So my input today is about the crisis in South Africa for most of the people, which is working class people. And the crisis, I must say, we are living the crisis. We are living this crisis every single day. And through the work of the AWCC, we hear on a daily basis the impacts of the crisis that we are in. Now, we know there is a drought. We don't deny that. We know that there is a shortage of water in our country. We know that, you know, there's a difficulty where water is concerned for many people. But why is there a difficulty for people, and who is there a difficulty for when there is a drought? We know that during day zero, as an example, that was a scare tactic, you know, for most of us, because we were told to use a certain amount of water. As an example, working class people were told, or all of us were told, that we can only use 50 liters and at some stage 25 liters of water per day. However, rich people could buy, and business like USA breweries and Nestle and all of them, they were doing business as usual. So we know there was also a crisis of mismanagement. Now, just to give a little bit of background, South Africa, Cape Town specifically, where I live, is one of the most unequal cities in the world. And in that means that the gap between the rich and the poor are so huge, and it continues to grow. We also know that since or post 94, informal settlements have more than doubled. So there are more people living in informal housing. And at the same time, our ANC government has received awards from other countries for their wonderful work in building RDP houses. But the RDP houses that is supposed to be sorting people out, this is social housing, housing that are meant for people who can't afford to buy bank houses, or who doesn't have work, they're unemployed. And so the social housing is considered the way out. And people wait many years, people wait for 30 years, some die waiting on this list. And then even then, when they are supposedly sorted out with these homes, these RDP houses that they got awards for, they are not sorted out because the houses are built far from the city, it's tiny, it's built with cheap material, so it's falling apart. But I think for us, the worst thing about it is that these houses come with a huge bill. So your water crisis starts there, your water struggle starts right there. When you're supposed to be sorted out is when your struggle for water actually starts, because those people get those houses with a bill of the water that was used to build that houses. And that is where the problem starts, because those are people who don't work or can't afford to pay. How are they even going to pay this bill? And then the government finds a way to hold that against them. They don't qualify for indigent grants. They don't qualify for many things simply because they owe the city of Cape Town money. And across the country, this has been the tactic that they've been using. Now, so I think what's very bad is services that's being delivered or not being delivered. Working class people in South Africa, the majority of us sit with very little access or no access to water at all. I'm going to start by telling my very quick story because this is my experience. In 2014, in this community where I live, the city of Cape Town attempted to install, in fact, they did install blue top water management devices. These blue top water management devices quickly earned the name weapons of mass destruction for what it did to our communities. So we had pensioners panicking, people panicking, disabled people panicking because they had no idea what this device was doing. There was no consultation, and those who were consulted were made very lots of promises, but the promises never materialized. Like they were told that their arrears would be scraped. They were told that they would be able to manage their water better. They were told that they would have pay very little for water, and water would be for free, 350 liters of water. But in the end, we now know that people ended up with that 350 liters of water. They still got high bills, and their arrears was never scraped. And so they were double or triple in trouble than before. And then what happens is those people living in this RDP houses, the social housing, ends up in the queues of those in informal settlements who've been living there for many years and standing in long queues and walking long distances, waiting for or hoping that there would be water in the tap by the time they get there. And of course, you can see how that would create conflict amongst the two communities. And there's often an informal settlement right opposite where these RDP houses are built, because it's so small, so tiny that the children of those people living in in the RDP houses have to move out eventually, and they end up setting up informal settlements so that they can live there. So these water management devices was terrible. It was really weapons of mass destruction. We had pensioners scraping ice out of the freezer so that they can use their chronic medication. We had women taking water out of pipes, broken pipes under the ground, some of them without water for more than a year, and just no support whatsoever from the city of Cape Town or our government at large. Um, this was terrible, and it forced us to get organized, and we pushed back. We designed a quick workshop that instead of going into people's houses and telling them that they shouldn't accept this device, we asked them to map their own water. We said, sit down, take a pen and write down, what do you use in the morning, what do you use in the evening, what do you use at night. And when people measured their own water, they could see what the city wants to offer versus what they use. And that became a very powerful tool in communities started resisting. On the 18th of April this year, last year, the city of Cape Town came out with another statement. And we know this is because we've been pushing back and pushing back, and we've managed to keep out these devices in entire communities, and in other communities, we managed to chase out the plumbing companies so that they can't install the devices. And because of that pressure, we believe the city of Cape Town came up with a new idea. And on the 18th of April, they came out with that idea, and they put out a statement to say that they have a new meter in mind, that this meter that we've been using, the 350 liters blue top, has now come to the end of its lifespan, which is weird, first of all, because we didn't even know that it was ending, that it had a lifespan, because while they were installing, they were telling us that this is for life. And so when it ended, it came to the end of its lifespan, they also came up with a new, what they call a conventional meter. And these meters will only allow, or we are allowed to use 500 liters of water. Now, I mean, it sounds good and it sounds better than the first one, but here comes the trick. So here comes the punishment. So if you use this water, you only allow, your tap is on free flow. They opened everyone's taps up and open, and now it's on free flow, and no one is restricted. But they're also not telling people why they are opening up the taps and putting it on free flow. So your water's on free flow, but you're only allowed to use 500 liters of that water. If you go above the 500 liters, within 2 months, you will get a warning letter. And we have received our warning letters already. The warning letter states that if by the 3rd month you still continue to use more than 500 liters of water, then you are going to be punished. And how are they going to punish you? They're going to put a coin in your water management device, and that will restrict you to only 200 liters of water that will literally drip out of your tap. This is already happening to communities, to households, and it's very, very difficult to survive like that. If that, I mean, if that if it isn't bad, here's the worst part of it. If after 12 months, they will punish you for 12 months. And if after 12 months, you still use more than the 500 liters, they'll give you another chance to use 500 liters again or to stay below. If after another 12 months, you don't stay below and they put you on another punishment, after that, the city manager has the sole authority to then decide whether you must be on prepaid water. And that for us is the scary part, because prepaid means we must buy and we won't be able to buy. Poor people will never be able to buy. The reason why we're sitting in these overcrowded conditions, or the reason why we can't afford to be to buy, or the reason why we can't afford to stay below 500 liters, is because we live in these overcrowded conditions, because we have more than four generations living in one house. We have people living in the backyard who put up shacks for themselves, people living in the front of the yard, and it's up to 4-5 households living on one property. So it's impossible for people to stay below 500 liters. And the City of Cape Town and our government knows this. We also know that it's not just limited to the City of Cape Town, because very recently, the Nelson Mandela Bay comrades who are facing day zero as we speak have been approached by government, and their solution is to give them the new conventional meter. Obviously without a consultation, because they're not telling people, but also 200 liters sounds a lot for people who don't have. So we also know that there was an Israeli delegation there in Nelson Mandela Bay meeting with the authorities to talk about how they can solve South Africa's water crisis. And they made suggestions to the Nelson Mandela Bay community that prepaid metering is the way. And as much as this prepaid meters, when you speak to our government, they say it's not privatization. It feels very private, because it's private companies coming to install, and we have issues. You can't go back to the government or the local government. You have to go and speak to the private companies or find them. And so for us, this is very private. I think, just lastly, I want to say that this for us is so important, the space, the reason why we joined the End Water Apartheid campaign is because we know for a fact that, capitalism operates internationally and the working class suffers internationally. And the only way we will get rid of capitalism, or the only way we can overthrow capitalism, is if the working class is united. And the comrades in Palestine are going through the same issues that we are going through. It's the same capitalist ideas, the same neoliberal policies that are forcing people, into scraping ice out of the freezers, into making decisions on whether they're going to cook or whether they're going to do their washing. And for us, this is a disgrace, and we must resist, we must fight back. As the African Water Commons Collective, we have over the past decade been mobilizing, building capacity, assisting in setting up water action committees across the city of Cape Town and in other areas, more rural areas of Witzenberg. And for us, it's important that we unite the struggles. We are currently talking about a campaign for water for life, and this is where we're going. We want this campaign to take off and to be huge, so that we can push back as a collective, because when we speak as individuals, we are not heard. And in the same way, the international solidarity makes a difference. If we speak here, no one hears us, but if we speak together from different countries, we will be heard, and we will be sure to reach our demands for water for life, so that we can all live in a society where water is running out of our taps, and it's clean, and we don't have to walk far distances or get raped or murdered when we are trying to access water. Thank you.
Wow, thanks, Faiza. I think you really both explained the situation that communities here are facing, the reasons why and how important it is for us to resist and to act in solidarity across the continent, but also with Palestine, and how the Israeli so-called experts are trying to capitalize on this crisis that's been created, in fact, as you said, by colonialism, the history of colonialism and apartheid, and the current government's inability to deal with it. So thank you very much. I saw at one point that Leo, our next speaker, was in the room, but I don't see him now. So I think, shall we move to the video inputs that he made?
Good evening, comrades. My name is Leonard Shampote, and I'm joining you from Accra, Ghana. I serve as the coordinator of the Africa Water Justice Network, and this evening I'm happy to, on behalf of the Africa Water Justice Network, express solidarity with the End Water Apartheid network. Basically, as the name implies, the Africa Water Justice Network organizes on the African continent and basically work in the 4 regions, but then we are yet to make inroads into Northern Africa. So now West Africa, East and Southern Africa. Basically, our objective is to resist and root out water privatization from the continent. We are motivated by the basic fact that water is life, and indeed it's an inalienable human right. As human beings, we cannot live without water. So any attempt or any approach that tries to put a price on it basically is an infringement on people's rights. So we are motivated by that fact, and we are for universal access, making sure, ensuring that governments are investing adequately into the provision of water services for both urban and rural areas. We find in Africa that the rural areas are mostly abandoned and mostly have to depend on charity. But then both urban and rural contribute to tax proceeds of government. So we need justice there too. So this evening, I think, in expressing solidarity, I think we should be able to work together on the continent and around the world. Because you find that governments increasingly are pushing the core responsibilities that they have towards their people based on the social contract that exists. These responsibilities are being shifted by government to the private sector, which is a very bad thing. I mean, we do not have any business at all with private companies when it comes to provision of water. That responsibility is the government, because it's the government that takes our tax monies. But then that's the unfortunate case we find. And these privatizations in the different forms that they come have also proved not to be effective. They even make the situation worse. And I think it is under this kind of dispensation that you find countries like Israel also coming in. We are against all companies and all countries. I mean, fueling this new habit of shifting rights, responsibilities over rights to the private sector, especially when it comes to the social, when it comes to social services. And we are most worried about the rising cases of Israel's involvement in water grabs and the so-called management and bringing in of technology and all of that. At least we know of Israel's track record in the Middle East, how they have colonized lands and actually creating havoc and the kind of human rights records that they have over there. Surely we do not want our water to be colonized. And I think in making this presentation, we have a duty to work together to resist and to resist to end all forms of colonization, whether it's been the colonization of water by some of these transnational countries or colonization of lands. Because basically you find the case that rights, people's rights, ordinary people's rights gets abused when this happens. And there are some progressive Israelis who also agree on this point. So the time is not enough. I think I will return in the course of the discussions to say more or to provide clarity on some of the points. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, Leonard. And Leonard is now back in the meeting. So at the end, please, if you have comments or questions, I think it's really great to hear how it's not just us in South Africa or just the communities in Cape Town that are facing this onslaught of privatization and on the back of that, the way that the apartheid Israeli state is using the situation to move into our continent. And I see there are colleagues here and comrades from our Pan-African network, Comrade Saleh, who's the Africa coordinator for the BNC, the Palestinian BDS movement. Also, I see Zahid from Kenya, and I think Sion from Morocco. So I'm sure we're going to be following up with Leonard and other comrades from Africa networks to see how we can continentally strengthen our links and strengthen our resistance and solidarity with Palestine. I don't think Fatu is here, so I think we can move on to Susan, and we're going to see her video, although she also is here. So at the end, please, following from her video input, if you have comments and questions, she is around today to speak to that again.
Hello, my name is Susan. I've worked in water development on the ground in Palestine with the Grassroots Palestinian collective Life Source. I was later part of a successful campaign with Stop Veolia Seattle to end Veolia's contract for paratransit in King County. I'm a mom, a grandmother, and an anti-Zionist Jewish person. I'm humbled to have been invited to speak to you today about Veolia, water privatization, and solidarity with Palestine. Veolia today is the largest privatizer of water and transportation globally. They have contracts across all continents, including Africa and the Middle East. Originally, Veolia was founded by imperial decree of Napoleon III to bring water and transportation to the French colonies. So we can trace a direct line from colonization and slavery to the privatization of public services. I'm allowing a moment for this connection to sink in. Other speakers today may be sharing about the importance of public sector employees having the skills, training, and experience to manage public services in-house. When for-profit corporations like Veolia get control of municipal investments in public services, they do not serve the people, but answer to their shareholders and corporate executives for their own private gain. Sadly, there are countless examples of Veolia and other large multinational corporations cutting corners, pocketing public investments, and jeopardizing public health and safety. We can look to the role of Veolia's water experts in the lead poisoning crisis in Flint, Michigan, or to all of the times when Veolia has failed to meet its contractual obligations, in a number of cases turning good drinking water bad, and how a World Bank court has found that even when Veolia doesn't meet its contractual obligations and harms the water supply that it was contracted to improve, that Veolia still has a right to make a profit. You might be thinking this cannot be true. A right to make a profit from corrupting the water supply? But remember, this is the World Bank who has made such a preposterous ruling. Yes, this is the same World Bank who required African countries to end socialized healthcare and education as a condition to receive a loan when trying to rebuild and provide for the people following decades of colonization and extraction. This is the same World Bank who's pushed the Palestinian Authority to adopt neoliberal policies, instituting prepaid water and electricity meters across Palestine, so Palestinians cannot protest and refuse to pay Israel for the water under their feet. Should we really be shocked that a World Bank court ruled that Veolia has a right to make a profit when they turned the water brown for the poorest province in Argentina and kept raising the amount they charged the villagers? Or that the World Bank court ordered the province to pay Veolia an amount equal to nearly 1/10 of Argentina's entire GDP? Resisting neoliberalism, prepaid water meters, and contracts with for-profit corporations and corporate water experts at home is one solid way to be in solidarity with Palestinians resisting Israeli colonization and apartheid. Let's proclaim these linkages as we rise up. As the Palestinian Authority's adoption and promotion of prepaid water and electricity meters reveals, neoliberalism is one of the weapons that Israel and the U.S. is using against Palestinians with the support of the World Bank. Veolia has been one of the main profiteers of Israel's ongoing colonization of Palestine. In 2015, Palestinians and solidarity activists celebrated a monumental victory when Veolia announced that it would sell what remained of all of its business operations in Israel. This included wastewater treatment in illegal Israeli colonies, management of a landfill in the occupied Jordan Valley, which receives trash both from Israeli colonies in the West Bank and in 1948 occupied Palestine, or Israel, and management of the Jerusalem Light Rail, which connects Israeli colonies in Palestinian East Jerusalem to Jerusalem proper, further normalizing Israel's ongoing colonization and systems of apartheid. In the 7 years prior to Veolia's announcement of defeat, activists around the world cost Veolia an estimated $20 billion in lost tenders, and cities passed resolutions excluding the company from future tenders due to its involvement in Israeli human rights violations. Activists gave Veolia little choice but to divest from its complicity in Israeli human rights violations. Veolia's status as one of the dominant water privatizers/water colonizers in the world, and its previous enmeshment with the provision of public services in the region, highlights the need to end Israeli water apartheid, along with all forms of corporate profiteering from Israel's ongoing colonization of Palestine. Israel has manufactured a system of water apartheid for Palestinians, using its powerful military and aid from the U.S. to dispossess Palestinians in the water-rich West Bank of their rightful share of the region's natural water resources. Even as 85% of the rainfall replenishing the Western Aquifer falls over the West Bank, Palestinians are able to access less than 6%. Israel is also using its military to deny Palestinians in Gaza from their share of the coastal aquifer established under Oslo, as well as the ability to be supplied with water from the West Bank, as most major cities around the world today are supplied with water from outside their municipal borders. It is in this context that Israeli corporations have emerged to market technology for desalinating brackish and seawater, treating wastewater, supplying agriculture with drip irrigation, and other technologies for addressing issues of insufficient water supply. But water scarcity in Palestine is not a matter of supply. It emerges from the political reality of colonization and apartheid. Do not trust any so-called water experts in Israel or elsewhere who speak of helping Palestinians or addressing water shortages in the region with new water technology, without calling attention to Israeli military orders and practices that prevent Palestinians from drilling new wells or even from deepening existing wells when deeper Israeli wells cause them to run dry. Who fail to name that Israel prevents Palestinian municipalities from connecting filling points to existing networks or running water pipes through their own territory and being able to supply their cities from outside their municipal boundaries as all major cities are supplied. Israel has manufactured Palestinians' dependence on buying back the water under their feet from Israel, and Israel takes full advantage of this control, cutting off supply to Palestinians in the harsh summer months. Do not trust anyone who claims that desalination or drip irrigation will somehow end this cruelty. There was one case of the Palestinian municipality Karawat Beni Zayed speaking out about increasing water shortages during each successive summer. They were gaslit when the West Bank Water Department came out and said that Mekarot, the Israeli national water company, in fact, was supplying them with more water each year. While the West Bank Water Department ostensibly serves Palestinians, in reality it is an Israeli parastatal utility providing colonial administration for the Israeli national water company Mekarot. Sitting down with council members in Karawat Beni Zayed and going through their water bills month by month for the 3 years prior revealed a duplicitous scheme. Their annual water supply was increasing, but their supply during summer months was halved and then quartered. Israel prevented the municipality from building a reservoir to store excess water, and then sent them more water than they could use or store during the months with the highest rainfall. Of course, they charged them for this wasted water. This is just one example of the gaslighting doublespeak, duplicitously concealing colonial water apartheid practices that Palestinians are subject to by the Israeli Water Authority and the West Bank Water Department. Israeli water technology companies and so-called experts are complicit in Israeli water apartheid by claiming their technologies will help, when the true source of water scarcity in Palestine is Israel's ongoing colonization and military rule that have manufactured water crises for Palestinians while supplying increasing amounts of Palestinian share of regional water resources to Israeli settlers, export agriculture, and industry.
Thanks so much. I think that was an amazing presentation. You managed to give both a global perspective, but also to bring out the similarities between the privatizing technologies that are affecting the communities Faiza was speaking about, and the same sorts of issues that Palestinians are faced with. but also I think, again, bringing out the fact of resistance, and in this case, the power of BDS. And I think it's very inspiring that the name Netafin was flashing across the screen, and we know they're huge into Africa, as well as the so-called technologies and drip irrigation schemes that these experts, so-called, are trying to sell to our government in South Africa. And yes, as I said, Susan is in the room. So after the last speakers, please, if people have questions and comments, she's here, or if you want to come in and say something additional. So the next speaker is Dinesh, who had to leave, so we do have his video, and then we'll have our last speaker, Mira, who will speak to us live in the meeting.
Hello, my name is Dinesh Suna. I'm the coordinator of the Ecumenical Water Network of World Council of Churches. I'm from India originally, and have been working with the World Council of Churches in its headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, for about 10 years now. And I am very happy that I am part of the People's Water Forum, as we call it. All those people who believe on water justice in the water justice movement. So I'm part of that, and I'm very happy that I am today recording this message to be contributed in the upcoming webinar. I guess it's tomorrow. Sorry for being late in sending this requested video message. Just a little bit about the World Council of Churches. The WCC, as we call it in short, is a fellowship of Protestant and Orthodox churches around the world. So we have quite a few people as members. So for example, 350 churches around the world that are members of the WCC, and the membership of through all the churches is close to 600 million. So it's quite a big group of people who are who recognize or identify themselves as associated with the World Council of Churches. And this came into being in 1948 and is headquartered in Geneva, in Switzerland. And among many other works, you may call it the World Council of Churches, obviously an ecumenical body, so it works around the unity of churches, but also it works on human rights issues, and particularly it was notably very actively involved in addressing the apartheid issues in South Africa, has worked closely with Nelson Mandela and with the movement. And my particular work it relates to water justice work, and therefore WCC also works on water issues. So this is about the WCC and a brief introduction about the Ecumenical Water Network. And let me then quickly talk a few points on the webinar, which is to address the water apartheid that is in Palestine, and the WCC's engagement through Ecumenical Water Network on this issue. And very quickly, I would like to refer to a particular case study, I would say, to strengthen my points on the issue of water apartheid that was also experienced during a campaign that the Ecumenical Water Network did with the support of the World Council of Churches way back in 2016. The Lenten campaign is something which since 2008, we have been carrying out this during the Lenten period according to the Christian calendar. As you know that every year, starting from the Ash Wednesday till the Holy Week before Easter, roughly about 40 days is observed around the world as the Lenten period. And incidentally, the World Water Day also falls on March 22nd, which is invariably during the Lenten period. And that's why we started this campaign way back in 2008 at the World Council of Churches Ecumenical Water Network to create awareness around water issues, particularly from a justice point of view, and address to our constituencies, which are the member churches around of WCC. And what is a good way of an entry point is to address the water justice issues through the biblical and theological reflections. And that is how this campaign is going on for the past more than 12, 14 years now. And in 2016, the Lenten campaign focused in the Middle East region, but with a specific focus in Palestine. And as per the campaign, we had a massive presence of church leaders from around the world, including the leadership of the World Council of Churches, the General Secretary, and we all met at a church in Jerusalem, led by its bishop. That time he was the bishop, Dr. Munib Yunan, and we had several international church leaders attending the Lenten campaign, which was a prayer service. And the liturgy, the reflections, the biblical texts, etc., that we had used, they were very much drawn from the water justice realities of Palestine, how two standards were used when it comes to accessibility of water in Palestine as compared to Israel, or also the Israeli settlers in the region. And all that we did, where we used publicly available data and resources such as from the UNDP, from Amnesty International, and several other credible resources to just underline and highlight that how an average Palestinian have so little access to safe drinking water as opposed to an Israeli settlers in the region. And we also fell back on our fact-finding mission of the Ecumenical Water Network. That was 2 years before, in 2014, when we had gone to Gaza, and we had gone to several parts of Palestine and Israel to have an assessment of accessibility and the human rights to water. And all those were pointing towards gross discrimination and disparity. And that is what, when it was raised, not only through the prayer service, but also through the several biblical reflections that were used at the during their Lenten campaign, that kind of irked or angered the Israeli government. And immediately after our launch of our campaign, the leadership of the World Council of Churches, among others, were called by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they started taking offense and accusing us that we were peddling the Palestinian propaganda. Well, we have used only the publicly available resources with regards to water justice issues in Palestine. Then subsequently, several of the WCC leadership members were also detained and deported from the airport when they came back for another meetings. So this was somewhat, the government became hostile towards the WCC, and dozens of, it can fit hate speech, so to say, were written against WCC, and how we are anti-Semitic. The World Council of Churches is not an anti-Semitic organization. However, as much as it respects these two countries, it always also takes a stand whenever there is a violation of human rights. And in this particular case, there was this human right to water of the Palestinians have been challenged and violated. And that is what this campaign highlighted. And we were subjected to a lot of criticism, a lot of hate campaigns, but all this had a positive side of it, that our visibility of our website at the WCC went all up to 2,000% during this Lenten campaign of 40 days period. So we took it as a positive sign that we have been able to make a difference. And that's why we continue to work on the water justice issues. We have collaborated with the Palestinian e-WASH, a kind of a coordination group on WASH mechanism, which had several UN and other civil society organizations were part of it. And we continued to raise the issues when it came to water justice issues within Palestine. And all the very powerful reflections from Palestine with regards to water justice are all available on our website. You can easily Google it by typing 7 weeks for water Palestine. Or 7 weeks for water 2016, and you would get all those details, the reflections, etc. So in the interest of time, I've stopped here and encourage you all to get in touch with me or other contacts of the WCC, Ecumenical Water Network, to know more about our work and our solidarity and support for human right to water in a dignified way, and justice for the people of Palestine are very much there, and we are there in this struggle with you. Thank you very much, and best wishes for the organizers of this webinar.
Thank you to Dinesh. It's a pity that you couldn't remain in the meeting. It's really interesting to hear about the work of the World Council of Churches, because we know just about a month ago, the World Council of Churches held its assembly, and there was a very strong lobby, but also, exactly as Dinesh described, a very strong pushback against the World Council adopting the language of Israeli apartheid. But it's really heartening to hear from churches that are so active, and also because in our Pan-African Palestine Solidarity Network, one of the other key areas that rose up as one of the big challenges to building solidarity with Palestine in Africa is, of course, Christian Zionism, and the way that theology, that false theology, has crept into many of the not only evangelical but also mainstream churches. So I'm sure we're going to be keeping in touch with Dinesh on both aspects, and it just shows the intersectionality of issues and struggles and how they do relate to our struggles here and the struggle for justice and against apartheid in Palestine. So now we'll move on to our final speaker, Mira. But before that, just to say, if you want to write questions or comments in the chat, please do so. Or otherwise, do put up your hands at the end of Mira's presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Roshan, and thank you, everyone, for inviting me to this event. I'm here on behalf of the Blue Planet Project, which is a global water justice project, working with communities, grassroots movements around the world to stop the corporate takeover of water and the privatization of water. I'm also a lecturer at Carleton University in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies, and am based in Ottawa, Canada, which is on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Also part of this newly formed coalition movement, calling ourselves the People's Water Movement, that emerged out of the first African Alternative Water Forum in Senegal last March. So I'm happy to be here, happy to see also this global show of solidarity, as much as we're talking about very heavy, very alarming issues. It's always inspiring, enlightening when comrades from around the world, from different sectors, come together to talk about solutions, and how we fight global problems together, because as we know, these are not issues that are located in specific geographical locales. It's not just about South Africa or Palestine that we are fighting global enemies and global systems that require change. I have learned a lot from this presentation. I'm not as much of an expert as others on Israeli apartheid, and have learned a lot from working with all of you over the years, but also this has been a really good and eye-opening conversation. What we do know, listening to, or what is highlighted listening to Manal from Palestine, Faiza from Cape Town, and all these other comrades, is that water highlights the ways in which racial capitalism functions, right? It makes it very clear when we look at what's going on in Israel, when we look at what's going on in South Africa, that capitalism isn't a neutral system. It is a system that is founded on racism. It is a system to which racism, colonialism are an integral part. That capitalism would not exist without long histories of colonialism, of the transatlantic slave trade, and of the ongoing dispossession, theft, and genocide of working class people of color, indigenous people, and people who continue to live under colonialism in places like Palestine, and that these are the communities who are facing today the compounded effects of the climate crisis and the global health pandemic. So that solutions to the climate crisis, solutions to water shortages, solutions to the global pandemic, to the COVID pandemic, cannot come from those who have created these crises. They cannot come from those who are benefiting, profiting from these crises. It needs to come from those who are most impacted by this crisis. Looking at what is happening currently, and what hopefully we will stop in South Africa, this emergence of a relationship, of a new partnership between South African cities and this Israeli institute, that we are, these are some of the newer trends, right? We've fought privatization successfully around the world. And I should, highlight that South African movements were very powerful and very effective in fighting privatization in the early transition to democracy in South Africa. And that as a result, we don't see there's very little privatization of water and sanitation services in South Africa, but where movements have been less successful is in all of the ways in which South African cities and the South African state have succumbed to a neoliberal agenda, who have given in to international pressures from the World Bank, from financial institutions, from lenders, international lenders or donors, to neoliberalize water and sanitation services. And so we see today in South Africa publicly owned and publicly managed water systems, supposedly, but acting in the interests of private capital. And South African municipalities, for instance, are forced to deliver on a full cost recovery basis, which means that their water services, that they are required to charge user fees for water services that cover the cost of water services. And so, without acknowledging, so what you have in Palestine is, ongoing genocide and removal of people from land, killing of people, violently removing people from access to what they need to survive, In South Africa, what you also see is, that all happened, right? There was forced removal, there was denial of access to water, but then in the post-apartheid, in the so-called post-apartheid era, where any effort or any promises that were made to correct that, to redistribute, and to do justice to those who were historically marginalized, were prevented by all these different forces of capitalism, by the World Bank, by international investors, and so on. And so you didn't see this redistribution that absolutely needed to happen to actually end apartheid in South Africa. And then as South Africa continues to look to foreign capital and institutions like the World Bank and now Israel to resolve these problems, what we're going to see is a greater and greater shift, right, towards protecting the interests of capital in South Africa, right? So in South Africa, tremendous resources needed to be injected into the process of ensuring redistribution, and that never happened. Like, we are talking about cities and infrastructure that were built not for the majority of South Africans, but for a small elite. And I'll leave it at that. I know there's a lot more to say on this. What I want to highlight as well is that what's dangerous about this initiative is that it's not Veolia. We know Veolia, we know how to fight Veolia, and South Africa has successfully done so. And as Susan, Susan's inspiring presentation about Palestine shows, we've successfully fought Veolia around the world. We've fought these big corporations, and we have the tools to do so. We're fighting metering, and it keeps taking new shapes and forms, right? So these, but what is this Arava Institute? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it properly. They pose as an academic institute, but in reality, what they are proposing are false solutions, but also to a false problem. We talk about false solutions to the climate crisis and so on, but there's also, this is a false problem, right? To suggest, as others have highlighted, that the issue in South Africa is a technical problem that can be solved by technical experts, by who are going to come and sell their innovative technologies. So we should continue to ask, as others have done on this call, who is benefiting and who is losing, and we should, challenge the framing of the water crisis in South Africa as we have around the world. I'll leave it at that and open it to other comments and questions.
Thanks so much. I think, again, moving from how it's and emphasizing we're fighting a global system and the current manifestation of neoliberal capital around water, but also bringing it back then to South Africa and to actually where the End Water Apartheid campaign started, with these new sort of morphed versions, no longer these big, huge corporations, but these, as you say, kind of opaque so-called water experts, academic institutes, when actually it's more of the same. But also, I think you said it, it's very inspiring just to get together and hear from people all around the world, to connect around this common struggle for life, for water. And I think that we need to also now think about, I think it was great to mention, to raise up Veolia and the fact that BDS can make an impact. Because I think often you feel that you're banging your head on a wall and nothing shifts, and to just remember the times when there have been successes, and then maybe look at how we can do some things maybe a bit differently when the sort of Israeli tech is kind of operating differently. But I think we have, as the BDS Coalition in South Africa, we did do a sort of research mapping of Israeli water and agri-tech, and there's much more of it than you would think in South Africa already. And we were hoping that we could also do this as the Africa network, and then sort of see where there are companies. It is still some of the big companies like Netafin but also these other smaller companies, what would be more strategic as a strategy, because we might have more successes with the smaller company. Alternatively, the larger companies in some ways might be more vulnerable if it was a campaign that was across the continent. So that was just sort of some of the things that we've been thinking about. But if people have comments or questions, or any of the speakers want to come in on any other aspects, Mira, go ahead.
I actually just want to give the floor to Susan, who I just see from the chat or from a private chat that she knows a lot more about the Arava Institute and can share. Also wondering if someone can dig up the South African press release on what they're doing because I don't think everyone has seen it. What this organization is doing in South Africa, that would be great.
Oh wow, I think I was just like, I'm just processing that this is connected to the Arava Institute, and I wasn't aware of like what actually had brought folks together in the moment, and so I'm glad to be connected with you all now. Actually, while I was living in Palestine, I was like an advisor at the Arava for a while, and just to say that like I was advising Palestinian students who all had issues with the Zionism of the organization. It's what I know of the Arava is it's ostensibly an institution. They offer bachelor's degrees, and for Palestinians, Israelis, and Jordanians to come together and study the environment together. But they only have Israelis on their board. None of their board does not include any Palestinians or Jordanians, and none of the tenured professors are at the time that I was there. I haven't really stayed in the loop were Palestinian or Jordanian. And it was just like really wild. Like there was like one particular 3-hour time of the students' whole bachelor's where they were allowed to talk about the Palestinians' right of return. And if Palestinians then were to mention right of return in any other context, they were totally shamed and told that they were not interested in peace and they were not interested in real solutions. And I don't know, it's been a long time ago. This was more like maybe 15 years ago. But I'm would love to know what they're doing in South Africa and help prepare messaging and help support whatever y'all have going on.
Thanks. No, I was trying to find the information. I mean, I think they were sort of used as a kind of through an academic at one of the universities here as a way of bringing these so-called experts from these startup kind of tech companies, one of which is Watergen, that boasts it can make water from the air, this kind of thing that anyway, people have known for, indigenous people have known for forever, but now, using this kind, selling this equipment, which one of the water people here at ex-person in the water ministry described as a hairdryer on the back of a bucky, on the back of a truck, which used more fuel to do this process than you could possibly get water from. But I'll try to find out find the stuff around it and let you know. I think it's like these individual kind of academic links that they then use as a channel to bring in these people, which may be more specific to South Africa because we do have an indigenous Zionist community. So, there's that kind of a link and a tendency to go that route. But no, we definitely should follow up on that because that's really interesting to know. Manal, I don't know if you want to come in. I don't see other hands up, but please do put your hands up.
I'd like to thank you all for the great and insightful speeches. I really learned a lot, especially drawing on connection between Palestine and other contexts. That's really important because this is how we can do joint struggle and mutual solidarity together. I wanted, if no one has any comment, I wanted to share with you a video that was created by a group of Palestinian young activists who were formed through the support of Stop the Wall campaign earlier this year. And this group of 14 activists from the Jordan Valley and Masafir Yatta, two areas in which Palestinians are bearing the brunt of Israeli water apartheid. They are trying not only to advocate for Palestinian water rights internationally and call for an end to complicity with Israeli water apartheid and the larger settler colonial project, but more than this, they are trying to change the material reality of water apartheid on the ground by navigating ways through which Palestinian communities in these areas can have access to water resources. So yeah, Adrienne, can you show the video?
احنا فيش عنا مي، يعني متوفرش كثير. المي بس في الأمطار يوم تمطر في أبيار بس يعني. وأما المستوطنين يعني عايشين حياتهم، عندهم مي، عندهم المي كثيرة، يعني مش إنهم يعطونا. أنا يوم أروح على المدرسة بحس في الأمان من مرة، فيش حدا بيحمينا، يعني إنهم بيسووا مشاكل معنا، بدهم يضايقوا علينا عشان يفكرونا إننا بدنا نطلع. لا، إحنا ما بدنا نطلع. احنا عايشين بين مستوطنتين، احنا مش عايشين بأمان. دمت والاحتلال الإسرائيلي موجود. أول ما تصير الدنيا ليل فيش حدا بيطلع من البيت، كنا بنضل في البيوت، لأنه في بعض الأوقات إنه بيبقوا المستوطنين متخبيين يعني في أماكن، إنه يوم يطلعوا الأطفال على المنتزه بيبقوا متخبيين إلهم، بحاولوا يعتدوا عليهم عشان نشعر بالخوف.
يا وداد هاتيلي سالي للجاري. المي هي من الأشياء اللي العبء الكبير على الست عندنا، لما بتلاقي المي من البير على راسها، بالإضافة للأعمال المنزلية والأشغال الثانية، فبتأثر على صحة المرأة عندنا في المنطقة. في كورونا نحن لما بنستخدم المي، بعد ما بنستخدم المي بنيجي المي اللي تحت الجلي نستغلها، لأنه عشان في شح عندنا في المياه، فبنروح بنحطها على الزريعة نستفيد منها كمان إشي ثاني.
دايما يعني بصحى من الصبح من النوم بدي أغسل وأشرب مي قبل ما أطلع المدرسة، بس ما بلقاش. ابن المستوطن يعني دائما بصحى من النوم بلقى المي عنده جاهزة، بشرب، بغسل وباخذ على المدرسة وهيك. أما إحنا لا، عندنا خط مي على الشارع بمرق من الأراضي تاعتنا بروح على المستوطنة، وإحنا ما بيصلناش يعني مي. إذا يعني حاولنا ناخذ منها يا بيجوا بيعتقلوا ناس من عنا، ممنوع. أنا حابة أكون عندنا مي عشان نستعملها للزراعة وللشرب يعني وللغسيل. حطوا لنا منتزه جديد، حوالي 40 مستوطن 30 مستوطن كانوا يخشوا على المنتزه يخربوها. ندخل نلعب زي ما هم بيلعبوا. شو طفولتي ما عشتهاش كويس. ان شاء الله بيروح الاحتلال من عنا والمستوطنه بتزول، الأراضي بتاعتنا بنرجع مبسوطين وخلينا نعيش بأمان.
Thanks, Manal. I think that really is a moving and powerful way to draw our meeting today to a close and feel inspired by the connections we've made, and to be reminded of the reality of the Israeli apartheid occupation, the effect on water in Palestine, and also on our communities, the same sort of effect, the legacy of colonialism and apartheid in our continent. But I don't know if there are any more comments or questions. If not, I'd like to suggest that we keep in contact, that if we may, we include you in our End Water Apartheid campaign, and also that we start to look at what companies there are here and think of ways in which we can implement BDS against them. Here, meaning in South Africa, but also in our continent, and where there are the same Israeli companies coming peddling their false solutions to our false crisis. So thank you, everybody. If there's nothing else, shall we say good night for now, or good morning? I think for Susan, it's still. And we'll keep in touch, and hopefully we'll meet again soon and see how we can take this conversation forward. I've learned so much. I mean, the whole issue of water is something that I wasn't familiar with, and it's just been an amazing, amazing meeting for me personally. So thank you so much, everybody. And we'll see you again soon. And solidarity with Palestine. We will win.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.